Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Camper Report. We have a doubleheader tonight. Hour one, in about an hour and a half, I'll be going live with Rich Kelts from Kelts Chronicles. But for hour one, or for the next half hour, we've got Ross Brendel. He covers the Vikings for Purple Daily. And obviously promote yourself a little bit.
Sure.
Where can they find you? What social media platforms? And then we'll get it going.
Yeah, no problem. We'll start with, I guess, what we're calling X these days. So we'll start with @the Brendel Ross on the X/Twitter machine. You can find me on Instagram too, but I don't do a ton of sports related stuff there. I have my own podcast, Minnesota Sports Chat. Each week you'll find different guests from all around the state of Minnesota, sometimes across the country, pretty similar to what you're doing, Benjamin. Just talking Minnesota sports. This time of year, there's a lot of Vikings football talk, Gopher football talk as well. And then the day job, I actually work for Hubbard Broadcasting on a number of different podcasts. One of them including on Mondays, the Before I Die podcast, which is a part of the Purple Daily podcast network. Purple Daily is, I think we can say this, the #1 Minnesota Vikings podcast in the world, consumed literally all over the world by Vikings fans, and it's a ton of fun. It's been a ton of fun to be a part of and talk Vikings football for. I've been doing that for, I guess this is the second season now officially on that podcast with my co-hosts Jesse Pierce and Judd Zolgad, and the Purple Daily Network is Judd Zolgad, Jesse Pierce, Declan Goff, Phil Mackey. There's a bunch of us, but I would be just a very small key in that cog. Very happy to be here. Thank you so much.
Yeah, big fan of your work. I found you about a week ago. Been watching some of your stuff on Purple Daily. So go, again, everyone, go remember to check that out. But without much further ado, you obviously told everyone where you could get where they could find you. Now I want to know a little bit, before we get to the main bulk of the topics, how did you get to covering the Vikings, and were you a Vikings fan growing up? Kind of what led you to these jobs that you're promoting right now, or like to these social medias that you're promoting?
Yeah, I do appreciate that question. I don't think my journey is a lot unlike or different from yours or many others. I guess it probably starts with the Minnesota Vikings, probably my first love in this town when it comes to sports, this town being the Twin Cities, Minneapolis, St. Paul. I went to school for actually broadcasting. I have a degree in broadcasting, started out as an intern with one of the most powerful sports stations in the country, which is out of Minneapolis, St. Paul, KFAN. They actually are the radio home of the Minnesota Vikings. Interned and worked there for a while, in and out of locker rooms, gathering sound for Minnesota Twins post games, Minnesota Vikings, Minnesota Wild, Timberwolves, Gophers, you name it. Did all that, made a bunch of stops in between, and now I'm at Hubbard Broadcasting, basically doing a form of the same thing. These days, I spend very limited times in locker rooms and actually the ins and outs of locker rooms, and more or less just kick back like 99.9% of us watch the games and read and react to them. And we're lucky to be able to do that in this current medium and broadcasting or prodcasting world that we live in, being able to do it how we're doing it right now, sitting here on an evening talking sports. So that's the very condensed version of how I got to where I am. I've been very fortunate to work alongside and learn from a lot of great people. So I don't take any of that for granted.
That sounds, me personally, I want to go to college to be a sports broadcaster. So real quick, before we get to the rest of the topics, how is there any advice for somebody like me? Should I go to, is it really important to intern at one of these stations, or, go straight to college? Probably.
Honestly, well, you can knock off that internship while you're in college. One, always follow your passion. If this is your passion, I would say follow it. The old adage, you'll never work a day in your life if you're doing what you love, right? So if you love doing it, you love talking about it, certainly by all means follow that. Honestly, I would give you props. I think one of the best things that you've done is what you're doing now, to be committing to doing this, whether 5 people are listening or 5,000 people are listening, is a huge first step. So first off, kudos to you. Second off, what you did, how you reached out to me and how you found me. Always go the extra mile. If you think you've gone far enough, go further. There are 1,000 people in this business, and they're all, well, I take that back. There's 1 million people, and they're all looking to gain an advantage. Right. About the best way you can gain an advantage and set yourself apart from others is to always be outworking. I don't want to call them your competition, because a lot of these people, even in this market, are my friends, even if they work for other stations, other ventures, other sports media outlets. But just constantly be working hard. It sounds bad, but publicize yourself as you can without being egotistical about it. Let people know what you're doing, and always be in front of people and be making a name for yourself. So I think you're off to a great start. I'm incredibly impressed. So kudos to you.
Yeah, thank you so much. But without further ado, let's get into kind of some of the breakdown of this 49ers Vikings game. Typically this new format that I'm trying to get going with the new channel, well, my new channel format, is we usually I usually have about an hour show, and I'll bring on one 49ers guest and one guest that we're playing that week. And so this show is definitely leading to our Monday night matchup, 49ers versus Vikings. So let's get into that a little bit. What are some weaknesses? Because I was like, I don't want to bring in completely a 49ers fan, because, yes, they know about the Vikings, but they're not super in tune to the Vikings because they don't cover them as much. They cover their own team, which is the 49ers. So I wanted to bring in a guy who is that's one of their main focuses, is covering the Vikings. So what are some glaring weaknesses that the 49ers can exploit on the Vikings? Because it's going to be important that we get that leg up, especially if we're missing potentially McCaffrey and even Deebo Samuel.
Yeah, it's very interesting for the Minnesota Vikings this year, because a lot of what has troubled and ailed the Minnesota Vikings this year actually kind of ailed them last year, but they went 13-4 and they were able to overcome those things. I don't know how much you were able to pay attention or follow the Minnesota Vikings last year, but they won every one-score game they played in until shockingly, as a Minnesota sports fan, you know how it ends. The first one-score game they lost was in the first round of the playoffs against Danny Dimes and the New York Giants. Go figure how that works. Speaking of two teams that have spun the other way, the Giants and the Vikings. The weaknesses for this team, they're very similar, as I mentioned, to last year. The defense is better this year than it was last year, but only marginally or anecdotally. It's not a top 5 defense by any stretch of the imagination. It can still be gashed in the passing game. It's incredibly weak up front, stopping the run. About the only thing they do is pressure the quarterback. And I really don't see how that will be a problem for the San Francisco 49ers, because they get the ball out of Brock Purdy's arms incredibly quickly. Yeah, I just don't think there will be much of an opportunity to pressure him. I think the biggest weaknesses that the 49ers can exploit is just their offense versus the Minnesota Vikings defense. And speaking candidly, I think the Niners can easily come into US Bank Stadium on Monday Night Football and win without Christian McCaffrey and Deebo Samuel. I think they're just, your roster is that loaded and it's that good. I'm not naive. The Vikings can win the game. It's the NFL. Strange things happen every week. Heck, the Niners coming off that loss to the Browns. If you want the Vikings to win, I think you would have rather had the Niners coming off of a win to the Browns. But now that the Niners have lost to the Browns, that potentially, I don't want to say it will wake them up, but maybe refocuses them, re-energizes them. But I think the biggest weakness for the Vikings is the 49ers offense against the Vikings defense. And then the Vikings protecting Kirk Cousins. The Vikings are very good on the outside of their offensive line. Pro Football Focus is Christian Darrisaw basically rated as the best tackle in the game or near the top by any metric. He's the left tackle. Right tackle, Brian O'Neill, very solid. The inside is where it starts to get wonky. You have Ezra Cleveland, who's probably average at best. Ed Ingram on his best day, and he's played his best day the last few weeks, probably average at best. Garrett Bradbury, the center, who they just gave good money to stick around after his rookie contract. Really good run blocker, not so great in the pass blocking game. And oh, by the way, he's been off and on injured this year. So that Niners defense, I don't know what scares me more. It's probably the Niners defense against the Vikings offensive line. So if you didn't feel so great about going into the game on Monday night, I think I gave you enough to feel pretty good about going into the game on Monday night.
To me, I think if you guys can bring home pressure, and especially if Deebo Samuel and Christian McCaffrey aren't playing, I'd assume one of those guys are, because you take both of those guys away, and now you're left with an offense that is kind of tameable because, Brandon Ayuk's great, but I think my question to you would be, do you guys have any corners that can cover one-on-one? Because what the Browns were so potent with is they were bringing pressure with 4, which I think the Vikings could do. We have a weakness at right tackle with Colton McKivitz. That right side of the offensive line isn't great. It can be exposed in the pass game. So what my thing is like, if the Vikings can run the ball well, and then what the Browns did last week was they got pressure on Brock Purdy, and every time Brock Purdy dropped back, there was always somebody in his face. And so he couldn't really throw it deep. He couldn't kill them deep. So the Browns were basically just playing this like blanket coverage where they were not allowing anything under 10 yards. And then they were just going to let the 49ers kill them deep. The 49ers never did because it was raining. And obviously we didn't have some of our weapons for the better part of that game. So, but I don't think that that's where you're saying it's like, I don't think that the Vikings have such an elite offense. I don't know. Do they have a one-on-one corner? That's what I'm asking you.
Well, I think defensively for the Vikings, they brought in Byron Murphy Jr. from the Cardinals, who has been very solid. The problem is he's one guy and can't cover everybody. And I think anybody who watches the NFL knows you pretty much need to go at least 2, if not 3 cornerbacks deep. The Vikings are not there yet. They took Kelvin Booth Jr. in the second round of last year's draft. He's been injured and barely plays. Caleb Evans, they took in the middle of last year's draft. He's probably been their second best corner. He's been injured and hasn't played a ton. In fact, he was injured earlier this week in the game against Chicago. The secondary is not good. It's the Vikings have a lot of cap issues. A lot of teams in the NFL do, but the Vikings are right up there with it. This entire year, the Vikings went into the offseason and they basically called this it's not a full rebuild. It's more of the soft rebuild where you're trying to be the competitive rebuild. Well, part of the competitive rebuild is a lot of players on just 1-year contracts. Davenport, who came over from the Saints on a 1-year contract, defensive lineman. Murphy Jr. actually got a couple of years. He's been solid, but no, I mean, to your point, if it's just Brandon Ayuk and that's all you have to try and cover, well, maybe there's a chance, but I'm not horribly optimistic. I just am not. Yeah. Harrison Smith might be the Vikings' best defensive player, might be a future Hall of Famer. He's also in his mid-30s. He's still very smart instinctually, but he's not as fast, not as quick as he used to be. The linebackers, most of them wouldn't start for other teams in the NFL. Just speaking candidly, Jordan Hicks probably would. Ivan Pace Jr. is a kid that they basically grabbed as a rookie free agent, and he's playing for them. That's I'm not saying that to diminish him, but that typically wouldn't happen on the best teams in the NFL. So there's issues in the secondary. I do think Byron Murphy Jr. is a good player, but he can't cover everybody.
Right. Well, moving on to kind of some other topic here, and this is more Viking side instead of 49ers side, but we're talking about maybe linebacker, how bad the offensive line is. You guys obviously just got Cam Akers. I do want to quickly ask you about him. Do the Vikings start to kind of mix him into the mix a little bit more? I know he was very talented for the Rams, just kind of always got a bad rap. And then are they still a playoff team? Obviously, the NFC, I think, looks a little bit stronger than it did last year. But if you look at your division, I mean, I think the Packers are beatable. The Bears, Justin Fields is injured now, so we'll see with them. And then really the only team you got to worry about is the Lions in your guys' division. Obviously, you have to, when you're a team like the Vikings, you have to worry about everyone. But the team that is elite in your guys' division is the Lions. So are they still a playoff team with those circumstances? And if they aren't, what trade do you think they still need to make at the deadline to kind of hoist them into that realm? Because the 49ers made the Christian McCaffrey trade last year, and that really made them a playoff team. I don't know if we would have made the playoffs otherwise. So what are your thoughts on this?
Oh, well, first off, if the Vikings are going to make any trades, I'll start with the trades, and if they're a playoff team, honestly, they have to beat the San Francisco 49ers. If you're 2-5, 7 weeks in with the only game to play before the trade deadline, the Green Bay Packers, even if you turn around and win that game, you're 3-5. They're not adding anybody. Personally, I think if this team is 3-5, they'll be pilfering as many pieces as they can for future assets. If they're 2-6, they'll especially be doing that. Do I think they're a playoff team? No, I don't, but I would also concede it is still very early. Openly, and again, candidly, a word I've been using a lot here in talking to you, I've been telling people after the slow start, which I would still say this is a slow start at 2-4. I mean, you really have beaten nobody. Your last win maybe was gifted to you when Justin Fields got injured, and you ended up going against a kid who was literally playing D2 college football at this time last year. I still can't. Only the Bears would roster a D2 college player as their backup quarterback. Yeah. I candidly, I think this is a team that they're just. You are what your record says you are. So yes, last year they were a 13-4 team. It was a very hollow 13-4 team. They were pulling rabbits out of their hat almost every week to win games. And I'll tell you, nobody here really believed it. I mean, we all wanted to because everybody in this town wants to win a Super Bowl. But I don't really think anybody really believed that it was going to be last year's team. And I think the evidence for such is what we've seen this year with the 2-4 start. So no, I don't think they're a playoff team. What changes that, though, is if you get a win over San Francisco. They've still only played one game in the division, which they got to win over the Chicago Bears. They'll actually play the Detroit Lions twice in the final 3 weeks of the season. So if you can stay within shouting distance of the Detroit Lions, you'll have your chance. That's what I'm thinking with my brain. My gut and my heart says that's just not going to happen. This is going to be a team that might be moving pieces. Your Cam Akers question is very interesting because they committed to Alexander Mattison in the offseason. They gave him a couple-year deal, but not a ton of money. I mean, in all honesty, they could cut him at the end of the year and eat the money. It wouldn't be the biggest problem they have with all of their cap issues. The Akers thing, what's most interesting to me is in small doses, he just looks better. He looks more comfortable in the offense. He's a hard runner. He's that prototypical runner that is always falling forward, which in the game of football means a lot when you can scrap together that extra yard or two. He also looks a heck of a lot more comfortable in the passing game. Alexander Mattison has had a handful of passes that he just needs to catch. He dropped a screen pass that was at least going to be a first down a few weeks back, probably should have been a touchdown against the Chiefs. So I don't know. The Vikings have always thought highly of him, and he played well in a backup and supporting role. Now being asked to be the guy, it just hasn't happened. Looking back on it, I think their plan was to go with more of a running back by committee with Madison being the lead back. But then they got their training camp and preseason and realized, boy, we want to do this running back by committee thing, and the only back we trust is Alexander Mattison. So they tried maybe overextending him at the beginning of the year, and then when that wasn't working out, they brought in Cam Akers, who, as you talked about, I don't know what the issues were, but he fell out of favor with the Rams pretty quickly after a really nice season, and he's been pretty good here. Now, he's in your division, so you have to tell me something I haven't been able to get to the bottom of. Maybe you can figure it out. Why is he out? Yeah. Why is he always wearing the winter ski mask? Have you noticed this?
I do not know.
Every game he's got the full winter
ha
mask on. Doesn't matter where they're playing.
I have noticed that. You know, I've wondered the same thing, but no, I don't understand that. Maybe it's some sign of good luck or something.
It throws me off. I mean, it was picture perfect in Chicago on Sunday, which almost never happens, and he's dressed like it's negative 10 degrees outside. I don't get it.
And you guys play in a dome, so like half.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that is. I will say though, I think the Vikings at the trade deadline, Jordan Hicks, Danielle Hunter. But what I would do if I were the Vikings is I would get some more picks. I would try to trade those guys in division, because those divisional teams are automatically, I think, going to pay more for those players, because they know that the Vikings aren't going to want to trade to teams in the division. So teams in the division are going to have to offer more. And that way the Vikings can kind of use that as leverage. You want these players, then offer us more and we'll accept. I think also the thing that kind of led you guys, I don't know, kind of mess you guys up a little bit last year during the draft was you didn't have as many picks. Obviously stockpiling picks this year is even more essential. I don't know how long, because you want to be a playoff team if you're the Vikings, and it comes into a whole nother. Are the Vikings willing to trust him with a full rebuild? And also it's like you want to be a playoff team, but you also probably want to have a quarterback of the future, which looking at your guys' roster, I don't think you guys have that right now. And Kirk Cousins, I don't think is the answer for a long-term rebuild type of thing. So, and another thing is, later on in the season, if you're not contending, you can see what your young guys have. You can let Jordan Addison get more of the targets than Justin Jefferson. So,
I think very quickly, your Kirk Cousins point is very well taken. It's the biggest conundrum that the Minnesota Vikings face. They faced it when Kwesi Adolpho-Mensah got here and Kevin O'Connell got here 2 years ago. They're still facing it now. Right now, initially they chose to kick the can down the road. They gave Kirk Cousins an extension. When the time came this offseason to sit down and talk with him, they basically told him, no, you're going to play out this deal. To me, that signals, when you look at what they did in free agency, didn't commit a lot of money, didn't bring a lot of guys in long-term, all on essentially one-year deals outside of Byron Murphy Jr. To me, that signals, okay, Kirk, if you can get it done this year, go for it, and we'll talk at the end of the year and see what happens. If you can't get it done, we need to move on for the betterment and the health of the franchise. I like Kirk Cousins. When he first got here, I've been very critical of him too, but I do like him. When he first got here, he was coming off of the Case Keenum year, where Case Keenum had essentially taken the Minnesota Vikings to the NFC Championship game. Kirk Cousins was brought in here to essentially win a Super Bowl. Nobody will say that, but that's why he was brought in here. It's the same reason the Minnesota Vikings brought in Brett Favre back in 2009. That hasn't happened yet. Case Keenum has won as many playoff games for the Vikings as Kirk Cousins has. Okay, Kirk Cousins has one playoff win. It's not all on him, but he is the quarterback. So to a degree, it's on him. I've always said you can win a Super Bowl with Kirk Cousins. It's just harder. Things need to be perfect. It's really tough to be perfect when he's making $45 million against the cap. And when he and this team, specifically this team, when this team is seriously ready to contend for a Super Bowl again, who knows when that will be, but logic tells you it's 2, 3, 4 years away. Kirk Cousins is pushing 40 at that time. He's not he's not going to be your starting quarterback at that time. So the time to move on is this upcoming offseason, which goes to your point. If you're 3-5 or 2-6 at the trade deadline, even if you're only getting 5th, 6th, 7th round picks, you want as many assets as you can possibly have. Because if the Vikings, let's say the Vikings finish with the 9th overall pick, they want Drake May. They think Drake May is going to go 2 or 3 overall. Well, they can't stay at 9. They got to move up. You need as many assets as you possibly can have. So I'm not willing or wishing Kirk Cousins out of here. I just think it's the logical fork in the road, and you can see that they're coming to the inevitable end of the road here. And to me, it is disappointing. It really is. I mean, you have to understand where I'm coming from. So I I'm in the back half of my 30s. I wish I had the youthful exuberance that you do. You've seen your team in recent memory go to the 49 or go to the Super Bowl. By the way, with Jimmy Garoppolo, who I actually believe is a lesser version of Kirk Cousins, which is part of the reason why I think Kirk Cousins can win a Super Bowl. But my whole life, all I know is NFC Championship game losses. The Vikings have lost 5 times in the NFC Championship game in my lifetime. The show that I'm on, Before I Die, a part of the Purple Daily Podcast Network, the mantra of Purple Daily is we just want the Vikings to win a Super Bowl before we die. And logically, sometimes to get to that point, Benjamin, I say this all the time, you have to be bad to get good. What is the point in going 7-10 and picking 15th overall? Go 4-13. Go 3-14. Bottom out. Take your swing of the bat at a rock star quarterback. And guess what happens? If you fail, you're just going to do what the Bears are going to do this year. They took Justin Fields. It's probably not going to work out. What are they doing 3-4 years later? They're going to spin the wheel on the quarterback roulette and try again. You're not losing anything by doing that. It's time. It's what I'm advocating for. I spun off topic there, but it's just
I don't
want the Vikings to intentionally lose games. That's not what I'm saying. If they win until you're eliminated from the playoffs, I'm okay if you win games. But what I'm saying is it was okay. It was good that the Vikings won on Sunday. I would have been happier if they lost. I'm not going to be upset that they won. But a loss would have been better because at 1-5, it's over and you start looking, okay, how do we move to the future? Well, now you're 2-4 and here comes San Francisco. If we beat San Francisco, we can turn our season around. I'm saying we're beyond that. At this point, we're beyond it. We've given this thing enough tries with Kirk Cousins and running it back basically year after year. It's time to move on and do something different. Just my opinion.
Yeah, Drake May. I mean, it's the time. Penix, if you get in the top 10, you could have a swing at him trading up. Drake May, Caleb Williams. That's a little bit of a stretch, but I mean, there are guys.
He's probably the Bears' next quarterback.
Bo Nix. Bo Nix as well. So it's a deep class. Definitely worth a shot to take a swing. But this is kind of, since you have places to go, you've got to be at the airport. Since you're in the same division, we can go fast here. Since you're in the same division as the Lions, are the Lions kind of, because you get to see a lot more of the Lions than 49ers fans do. And obviously the Lions just won. For me, I think they'd be probably number 1 in my power rankings now after the 49ers just lost. Are they starting to be an underrated team that the 49ers should be worrying about?
I don't know if they're underrated. It's funny because with the Lions, especially being a Vikings fan, the Lions, they're kind of like the old Chicago Cubs where they were the lovable losers of Major League Baseball. That's basically kind of what the Lions were. The Lions have always been in the same division as the Minnesota Vikings, and nobody has ever despised the Detroit Lions. You know, when you start to get people that don't really like you and they're not happy with you, that's when you know you've started to make it. That's kind of where the Detroit Lions are at. I don't think it's fully at that level yet, but people have taken notice. I would still say at the end of the year, I expect the San Francisco 49ers or the Philadelphia Eagles to represent the NFC in the Super Bowl. I wouldn't put it past Detroit to make a run, be there. Maybe. I don't even like saying this because I don't really believe it. But Detroit's path to a number 1 seed is slightly easier than the Philadelphia Eagles and the San Francisco 49ers, just looking at division and scheduling. So I do think if you were to say the Detroit Lions get the number 1 seed, they get a week off, they never have to leave Ford Field, okay, I can buy into that. If the Lions aren't the number 1 seed, I don't see them going to San Francisco and winning a playoff game. I don't see them going to Philly and winning a playoff game. Dan Campbell's easy to poke fun at, but what you can't poke fun at is how hard that team plays, how physical they are, and by the way, how fun they are to watch on offense. So there's a lot of good things going on there. I won't be annoyed. We had this conversation on Before I Die earlier this week. I won't be annoyed by the Lions until they beat the Vikings to a Super Bowl, which the life that I leave, it's inevitable that the Detroit Lions will win a Super Bowl or get to the Super Bowl before the Vikings. And who knows? It's the NFL. And just when you think you know, you don't.
Yeah, that's true.
For all I know, 4 months from now, I'll be talking to you and we'll be wondering how the Detroit Lions won the Super Bowl.
Yeah. I mean, good point. I will say that the defense definitely for the Lions is still definitely a offense-based team. They've lost a lot of guys in the secondary. So who knows?
Yep.
I mean, once they face an elite offense like the 49ers or sometimes the Eagles, although their new offensive coordinator, I don't really like him. But
I think they're going to figure it out, though. There's just too much talent on that team not to figure it out. I think with teams like the Chiefs and the Niners and the Eagles, I think it's only human nature that you get to a point where you're kind of just going through the motions until you get later in the season. And I don't know if that's where these teams are at, but think about being where the 49ers and the Eagles are at, and even the Chiefs. You're in the NFC Championship game or the Super Bowl every year. Some of these games in September and October, it just has to be tough to get up for every game that you play. So I'm not writing the obituary for the Philadelphia Eagles offense just yet.
We'll see. We will see for sure. Real quick before we get you out of here, final score prediction to the Niners-Vikings game. I'm going to go here. I'm going to say Niners get to 30 like they usually do, assuming that either Deebo Samuel or Christian McCaffrey is playing. Reports came out that Ian Rappaport, I think, reported earlier today that Christian McCaffrey has a chance to play. I have a feeling either one of those guys will be there for that game. So if that is the case, I think the Niners get to 30, especially against this defense. I'm going to say 31-17. 31-17, Niners run away. I think it could be close in the first half, but they make good adjustments in the second half and they run away with it. 31-17.
I like your optimism on the 30 points, and you're probably right, but I'm going to look at it a little bit differently. Now, I know it's an extra day, but you are talking the Niners crossing a couple time zones, coming to Minneapolis, playing on the road. US Bank Stadium will be loud. It will be rocking. It will be a tough place to play. So to your point, I think maybe the Vikings, we didn't even talk about it, minus Justin Jefferson again. The pass game was dreadful against a woeful Bears team this past weekend. So I'm not too optimistic. I do think Brian Flores will do enough to slow down the 49ers just a little bit. But it's Kirk Cousins in prime time, which almost always means a loss. So I'll take the Niners 27-13.
Okay, cool. Well, before we get you out of here, what's another, promote yourself one more time and tell people where they can find you.
Yeah, especially if you're a 49ers fan and you're listening to this and you want to go behind enemy lines, just Google Purple Daily. You will find it available on YouTube or in podcast form. And if you love pain of sports, well, then you should follow Minnesota Sports and Minnesota Sports Chat, which is also available on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. But very nice to meet your acquaintance. I wish you well in everything that you do. And if anything you ever do needs another Minnesota sports person, just give me a holler. I'd love to help you out.
No problem. Well, everyone, this has been great. Clap it up for Ross Brendel from the Purple Daily and wherever else you can find him. But everyone else, have a good rest of your night. Quick announcement, 30 minutes, I'll be going live with Celts Chronicles. We'll be breaking down a little bit more of the game, as well as just some 49ers topics. So I'll be doing that for another 30, 40 minutes. Everyone, this has been a great day. Go and have yourself some dinner, and we'll see you guys on the next stream.